Sarah Martinez had always loved her evening walks through the quiet suburban streets of Millfield. The 34-year-old nurse found these peaceful moments essential after long shifts at the regional medical center. The tree-lined neighborhood felt safe, familiar, and predictable, exactly what she needed to decompress from the chaos of emergency room work. On that particular Tuesday in October, Sarah finished her shift at 6 p.m. and decided to walk the 2 miles home instead of taking her usual bus route. The autumn air was crisp, and the golden hour sunlight filtered through the changing leaves, creating a perfect atmosphere for reflection. She had recently accepted a promotion to head nurse, and the additional responsibilities weighed heavily on her mind. As Sarah strolled down Maple Street, she noticed how quiet the neighborhood seemed. Most residents were inside preparing dinner, and the usual sounds of children playing had faded with the approaching dusk. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and checked her phone. 7:15 p.m. Her husband David would be expecting her home soon. The first sign something was unusual came when she noticed the lack of typical evening sounds. No cars driving by, no dogs barking, not even the distant hum of highway traffic that usually provided a subtle background noise. The silence felt almost oppressive, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Sarah continued walking, her footsteps echoing slightly off the pavement. She passed the familiar landmarks, Mrs. Chen's perfectly manicured garden, the old oak tree where neighborhood kids had carved their initials, and the small park where she and David had their first date 5 years ago. Everything looked normal, yet something felt fundamentally different. As she turned onto Elm Street, just 3 blocks from her house, Sarah heard a sound that made her pause. It started as a distant thrumming, barely perceptible, like the low rumble of an approaching thunderstorm. But the sky was clear, with only a few wispy clouds visible against the darkening blue. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It was mechanical, rhythmic, and definitely coming from above. Sarah looked up, shielding her eyes from the last rays of sunlight, but saw nothing initially. The thrumming continued to intensify, creating vibrations she could feel in her chest. Then, she saw it. A black helicopter appeared over the tree line, flying lower than any aircraft she had ever seen in this residential area. It was completely black, with no visible markings, numbers, or identifying features. The aircraft moved with deliberate precision, not like a medical helicopter or news chopper she was familiar with from her work at the hospital. Sarah stopped walking and watched as the helicopter seemed to slow its forward movement. The sound became overwhelming, drowning out everything else. Leaves swirled around her feet from the downdraft, and she had to steady herself against a nearby fence post. What happened next defied every logical explanation Sarah could think of. The helicopter appeared to be descending, positioning itself directly above the street where she stood. The pilot seemed to have spotted her, because the aircraft began hovering at a height that felt uncomfortably low, perhaps 50 feet above the ground. Sarah looked around frantically, expecting to see other residents emerging from their homes to witness this unusual event. But the street remained empty. No porch lights turned on, no curious faces appeared at windows, no front doors opened. It was as if she were the only person in the entire neighborhood. The helicopter's spotlight suddenly blazed to life, creating a brilliant white circle on the pavement around Sarah's feet. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like an actor caught in stage lights. Her heart began racing as the reality of the situation hit her. This was not a coincidence. This was not a routine flight. Someone was deliberately focusing attention on her. Sarah's nursing training kicked in, and she began cataloging details with clinical precision. The helicopter was definitely military or law enforcement style, but unlike any she had seen before. The black paint seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no visible windows except for what appeared to be a cockpit area. Most unsettling of all, there were no registration numbers or agency markings that she could see. The spotlight followed her as she took a tentative step backward. The helicopter adjusted its position accordingly, maintaining the beam directly on her. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October evening air. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements, and had gone to extraordinary lengths to intercept her simple walk home. She reached for her phone to call David, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock the screen. The helicopter's rotor wash was creating a whirlwind of debris around her, making it difficult to see clearly. Dust and small leaves stung her eyes, and her hair whipped across her face. Sarah managed to dial David's number, pressing the phone tightly against her ear to hear over the deafening rotor noise. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again with the same result. Panic began creeping into her chest as she realized she might be completely alone in this bizarre situation. The helicopter began to descend further, now hovering at what felt like 30 feet above the street. The downdraft was so powerful that Sarah had to brace herself against a nearby car to avoid being knocked over. The spotlight never wavered from her position, creating an almost supernatural feeling of being observed by something beyond her understanding. In that moment, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running, instead of hiding, she looked directly up into the blinding light and raised her hand in a gesture that was part wave, part surrender, and part defiant acknowledgement that she knew she was being watched. The response was immediate and shocking. The helicopter's spotlight began flashing in a deliberate pattern, 3 quick flashes, followed by 2 longer ones, then 3 quick flashes again. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately from her military father's stories about his service. It was Morse code, spelling out SOS. Someone in that helicopter was asking for help. Sarah stared up at the flashing spotlight, her mind racing to process what she was witnessing. The SOS pattern repeated 3 more times before stopping. The helicopter continued hovering, its spotlight now steady again, but something had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a terrifying encounter was transforming into something else entirely, a plea for help from someone who seemed as trapped as she felt. Drawing on her medical training and experience dealing with crisis situations, Sarah forced herself to think clearly despite her fear. Someone in that aircraft needed assistance, and, for reasons she couldn't understand, they had chosen her. She pulled out her phone again and activated the flashlight, holding it high above her head. Carefully, Sarah began flashing her phone light in response, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The international distress signal. If someone up there understood Morse code well enough to send it, they would recognize her reply. The helicopter's spotlight immediately began flashing again, but this time in a different pattern. Sarah tried to follow along, her father's old lessons coming back to her. The message was longer, more complex. She caught fragments: help, forced, not, control. A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. Someone in that helicopter was sending a message that they were not in control of their situation. The implications were staggering. Was the pilot being coerced? Was this some kind of hijacking? Or was something even more complex happening? The helicopter began moving slowly down the street, its spotlight maintaining focus on Sarah as she walked beneath it. She realized they wanted her to follow, or perhaps they were following her. Either way, she was now part of whatever was unfolding. Sarah continued walking toward her house, her phone ready to flash responses to any additional messages. The helicopter stayed directly overhead, moving at her walking pace. The surreal nature of the situation struck her forcefully. She was having a conversation with a mysterious aircraft using light signals while walking through her own neighborhood. As they approached the intersection near her home, Sarah noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A black sedan with tinted windows was parked at the corner, its engine running. The car had not been there during her morning walk to work, and she knew every vehicle that belonged in this neighborhood. The helicopter's spotlight suddenly swung away from Sarah and illuminated the sedan. The car's response was immediate, it accelerated quickly and disappeared around the corner. But not before Sarah caught a glimpse of government license plates. The spotlight returned to Sarah, and the Morse code flashing resumed. This time the message was urgent, rapid, danger. They know. Run. Sarah's heart pounded as the pieces began falling into place. The empty neighborhood, the government car, the helicopter pilot's obvious distress, she had somehow walked into the middle of something far more serious than a simple evening stroll. Someone was watching her, tracking her, and the helicopter pilot was trying to warn her. Without hesitation, Sarah broke into a run. Her house was only 2 blocks away, but those blocks suddenly felt like miles. The helicopter kept pace above her, its rotor wash now helping to propel her forward rather than impeding her progress. As Sarah ran, she tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this connected to her work at the hospital? Had she witnessed something in the emergency room that she shouldn't have seen? Her mind raced through recent patients, unusual cases, conversations she might have overheard. Then, she remembered the patient from 3 weeks ago. A man had been brought in after a car accident, unconscious and without identification. He had distinctive tattoos and spoke in his sleep in what sounded like Russian. During his recovery, he had mentioned numbers and coordinates that Sarah had assumed were delirium. But she had made the mistake of writing some of them down, thinking they might be important for his medical care. The patient had recovered and left the hospital, but not before Sarah overheard him making a phone call in fluent English with no trace of the accent he had displayed earlier. She had found it odd but hadn't reported it, assuming there was a reasonable explanation. Now, running beneath a mysterious helicopter while being watched by government agents, those seemingly innocent details took on a much darker significance. Had that patient been involved in something illegal? Had Sarah inadvertently documented something she wasn't supposed to see? The helicopter's spotlight began flashing again as Sarah neared her street. They want notes. Destroy. Sarah's blood ran cold. Someone knew about the notes she had taken. Someone knew she had information connected to that mysterious patient. And someone was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to get that information. She reached her house and fumbled with her keys, the helicopter still hovering overhead. As she unlocked her front door, Sarah looked up one more time. The aircraft was beginning to gain altitude, but the spotlight flashed one final message: trust. No. 1. Safe. Sarah rushed inside and immediately locked every door and window. Her hands shaking, she went to her home office and retrieved the small notebook where she had written down the patient's mumblings. The pages contained what looked like random numbers and letters, but now she realized they might be codes, coordinates, or some kind of classified information. Through her living room window, Sarah could see the helicopter's lights disappearing into the distance. But, at the same time, she noticed 2 more black sedans had appeared on her street, parked strategically at both ends of the block. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "We need to talk. The notes you took are very important. Come outside." Sarah ignored the message and called David again. This time he answered on the first ring. "Sarah, where are you? I've been calling for an hour, but your phone went straight to voicemail." "David, I'm home, but something's happening. There are cars outside, and a helicopter was following me, and slow down." "What cars? What helicopter?" Sarah looked out the window again. The street was completely empty. No sedans, no government vehicles, no trace of anything unusual. Even the sound of helicopter rotors had completely faded. They're gone," she whispered into the phone. "Who's gone?" "Sarah, you're scaring me. I need you to come home right now." "And, David? When you get here, park in the garage and come through the back door. Don't use the front entrance." "Sarah, what's going on?" Before she could answer, every light in the house went out. The power had been cut. In the darkness, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Sarah crouched in her darkened living room, phone pressed against her ear as David's concerned voice continued asking questions she couldn't answer. Outside, she could hear car doors slamming and footsteps on the pavement. The approaching sounds were coordinated, professional, and definitely not from curious neighbors. "David, listen to me carefully," Sarah whispered. "Don't come home yet. Go to your sister's house and wait for me to call you. Something is very wrong here. Sarah, I'm not leaving you alone if you're in danger. I'm 5 minutes away. No. Please, just trust me. I'll explain everything later, but right now I need you safe." Sarah ended the call and turned off her phone, removing the battery as she had seen in movies. Through the front window, she could see flashlight beams moving across her yard. At least 3 people were approaching the house from different angles. Moving carefully in the darkness, Sarah made her way to her home office. She needed to find those notes and figure out why they were so important. Her hands fumbled through the desk drawer until she found the small notebook. By the light of her phone's camera flash, she quickly photographed each page before tearing them out and stuffing them in her pocket. A loud knock echoed through the house, followed by an authoritative voice. "Mrs. Martinez? This is Agent Thompson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you regarding a matter of national security." Sarah's heart pounded. The FBI? What had that patient been involved in that would warrant federal attention? She remained silent, hoping they would assume she wasn't home. "Mrs. Martinez, we know you're inside. Your safety is our primary concern. We have reason to believe you may have inadvertently come into possession of classified information." The knocking continued, more insistent now. Sarah realized they weren't going away, and breaking down her door was probably within their authority if they truly believed she had classified materials. She made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of hiding or surrendering, Sarah decided to escape. Her house backed up to a small wooded area that connected to the neighborhood behind hers. If she could make it to the back fence, she might be able to disappear long enough to figure out what was really happening. Sarah grabbed a backpack and stuffed it with water, energy bars, a flashlight, and a portable phone charger. She also took her laptop and the original notebook, even though she had already photographed the important pages. Moving as quietly as possible, she made her way to the back door. The pounding on the front door was becoming more aggressive, and she could hear radio chatter from the agents positioned around her house. Time was running out. Sarah slipped out the back door and stayed low as she crossed her yard. The fence was only 4 feet high, and she managed to climb over it without making significant noise. On the other side, she found herself in the dense woods that had been her childhood playground. Using her phone's dim light sparingly, Sarah navigated through the familiar trees. She knew these woods led to Riverside Park, where there was a 24-hour diner that might provide temporary shelter and a chance to think clearly about her situation. As she walked through the woods, Sarah's mind raced through everything that had happened. The mysterious patient, the helicopter pilot's warnings, the government agents at her door, it all seemed connected to those seemingly random notes she had taken. But what could be so important about the mumblings of an injured man? She stopped walking and pulled out the notebook pages, using her phone light to examine them more carefully. The numbers and letters she had written down looked like coordinates, but there were also what appeared to be dates and times. Some entries were followed by abbreviations she didn't recognize: DS7, Operation Blackwood, Site Bravo. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized she might have documented details about a covert operation. The patient hadn't been delirious, he had been repeating mission information, possibly trying to contact his handlers while unconscious. A branch snapped behind her, and Sarah spun around. A figure was moving through the woods, following her path. Then, another movement to her left, and a third to her right. They had tracked her into the woods and were closing in from multiple directions. Sarah broke into a run, abandoning any attempt at stealth. Her childhood knowledge of these woods gave her an advantage, and she knew about a small creek that was difficult to cross in the dark. If she could reach it, she might be able to lose her pursuers. Behind her, she could hear the agents calling to each other, coordinating their search. Flashlight beams swept through the trees, and she realized they had night vision equipment. Her advantage was disappearing quickly. Sarah reached the creek and splashed across, soaking her shoes and pants but gaining precious distance. On the other side, she climbed up a steep embankment that led to the park. The diner's neon sign was visible through the trees, promising safety and witnesses. But, as she emerged from the woods, Sarah saw that the diner's parking lot contained several black SUVs. More agents were waiting for her, having predicted her destination. Trapped between the agents in the woods and those at the diner, Sarah made a desperate decision. She pulled out her phone, turned it on, and called the local news station. Channel 7 News, this is Rebecca speaking. This is Sarah Martinez. I'm a nurse at Regional Medical Center, and I'm being chased by federal agents who claim I have classified information. I'm in Riverside Park, and I need media witnesses here immediately.
Ma'am, is this some kind of prank? Look up in the sky above Riverside Park right now. You'll see a helicopter circling. These people cut the power to my house and chased me into the woods. I don't know what I've gotten involved in, but I need protection. Sarah could hear the woman typing, probably checking police scanners or looking up her information. Ma'am, I'm sending a news crew to your location. Stay on the line and stay in a public area. As if summoned by her phone call, the black helicopter reappeared overhead, its spotlight scanning the park. Sarah realized the pilot was still trying to help her, providing a visible confirmation of her story for the news crew. The agents from the woods emerged into the park, moving cautiously now that Sarah had potentially created media attention. One of them, a tall man in a dark suit, approached with his hands visible. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Agent Thompson. We're not here to hurt you. We just need to discuss the information you may have accidentally recorded. This is a matter of national security, and we believe you could be in danger. Danger from whom? Sarah called back, staying near the park's main path where security cameras would record everything. The patient you treated 3 weeks ago was a Russian intelligence operative. The information you wrote down contains details about sleeper agents operating in this country. If that information falls into the wrong hands, American lives could be at risk. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had stumbled into an international espionage situation simply by doing her job as a nurse. The notes in her pocket weren't just random mumblings, they were intelligence about foreign agents operating on American soil. In the distance, she could see news vans approaching the park, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The arrival of the Channel 7 news van changed everything. Sarah watched as the bright camera lights illuminated the park, and reporter Jessica Chen stepped out with her crew. The federal agents immediately backed away, speaking urgently into their radio devices. Agent Thompson approached Sarah again, this time with his badge clearly visible and his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Mrs. Martinez, I understand your caution, but we need to resolve this situation quickly. The information you have could compromise ongoing operations and put innocent people at risk. Sarah looked up at the helicopter, which was still circling overhead. The pilot flashed the spotlight once, a signal she interpreted as encouragement to continue being cautious. If you're really FBI, then you can wait until I have legal representation present, Sarah replied loudly enough for the news crew to hear. And you can explain why that helicopter pilot was trying to warn me about you. Agent Thompson's expression darkened. What helicopter pilot? We don't have any aircraft in this operation. Sarah pointed upward. That helicopter has been following me all evening. The pilot was sending me Morse code warnings about being in danger. For the first time, Agent Thompson looked genuinely surprised. He spoke into his radio, and Sarah could hear fragments of his conversation, unknown aircraft, not one of ours, possible compromise. Jessica Chen and her cameraman approached, and Sarah felt a surge of relief. With media witnesses present, she felt safer making decisions about how to handle this situation. Mrs. Martinez? I'm Jessica Chen from Channel 7. You called about being chased by federal agents? Yes. These men claim I accidentally recorded classified information while caring for a patient, and they want to confiscate my notes. But I don't understand why they couldn't simply ask for cooperation through proper channels. Agent Thompson stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Agent Thompson, FBI. This is indeed a matter of national security, but there seems to be some confusion about our protocols. Mrs. Martinez, we would like your cooperation, but you have every right to legal representation. The helicopter above them began descending, its spotlight focused on the group. Agent Thompson and his team immediately drew their weapons, pointing them skyward. Unidentified aircraft, you are in restricted airspace. Land immediately or we will take defensive action. The helicopter continued descending until it was hovering just 30 feet above the park. Sarah could now see through the cockpit window. There was only one person aboard, the pilot, who appeared to be wearing a military uniform. Through a loudspeaker, the pilot's voice crackled across the park,
this is Colonel James Mitchell, U.S. Air Force Intelligence. Agent Thompson, you are operating outside your jurisdiction. Mrs. Martinez, the men approaching you are not FBI agents. Sarah's blood ran cold. Agent Thompson and his team suddenly looked much more dangerous, and their professional demeanor began to crack. That's impossible, Agent Thompson shouted over the helicopter noise. We have proper identification. Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the loudspeaker again. Mrs. Martinez, the patient you treated was one of our undercover operatives. He was posing as a Russian agent to infiltrate a spy ring. The information you recorded contains the real identities of actual Russian sleeper agents. These men work for that spy ring, and they've been trying to recover that information before we can act on it. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place for Sarah. The mysterious patient, the government cars, the power outage, it had all been orchestrated by foreign agents trying to retrieve information that could expose their entire operation. Agent Thompson, or whoever he really was, spoke urgently into his radio in what Sarah now realized was Russian. His team began moving to surround Sarah and the news crew. Everyone stay calm, Jessica Chin said, continuing to film. We're broadcasting live. Colonel Mitchell's helicopter touched down in the park's open area, and the pilot emerged wearing full military dress uniform. He approached the group with official identification clearly visible. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to hand over the notes you took. We've been monitoring this situation since our operative reported a potential compromise. The helicopter surveillance was for your protection. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the notebook pages. Colonel, how do I know you're really who you claim to be? A fair question. Call this number, he handed her a card, and ask for verification of Colonel James Mitchell, Air Force Intelligence. You can also verify my identity through the base commander at Peterson Air Force Base. As Sarah dialed the number, the fake agent Thompson and his team began backing away from the media attention. Colonel Mitchell spoke into his own radio, suspects are moving to evacuate. Request immediate backup for apprehension. Within minutes, the park filled with legitimate law enforcement vehicles. Real FBI agents arrived and immediately arrested the fake agents, who had been attempting to leave in their black sedans. The number Sarah called confirmed Colonel Mitchell's identity and explained that she had indeed been under protective surveillance since their undercover operative had reported a potential intelligence leak. Mrs. Martinez, Colonel Mitchell explained as the situation calmed down, you did exactly the right thing by refusing to cooperate with those men and calling for media witnesses. Your quick thinking prevented classified information from falling into enemy hands. Sarah looked around the park, which now resembled a scene from a spy movie. News crews from multiple stations had arrived, federal agents were processing evidence, and the helicopter that had protected her was being refueled for its return flight. Colonel, what happens now? The information you recorded will help us roll up an entire spy network that's been operating in this region for years. You'll need to provide a formal statement, and there may be a trial where your testimony will be required, but your part in this operation is essentially over. David arrived at the park after being cleared by security, and Sarah finally felt safe enough to relax. As she hugged her husband and tried to explain everything that had happened, she realized how drastically her simple evening walk had changed their lives. 6 months later, Sarah testified in a closed federal court proceeding that resulted in the conviction of 12 foreign intelligence operatives. The fake agent Thompson and his team were revealed to be Russian nationals who had been operating under deep cover for over a decade. Colonel Mitchell received a commendation for his quick thinking in protecting a civilian asset, and Sarah received a letter of appreciation from the Director of National Intelligence for her courage and cooperation. The mysterious patient who had started it all was actually Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, a decorated Air Force intelligence specialist who had spent 2 years infiltrating the spy ring. He made a full recovery from his injuries and successfully completed his mission. Sarah still takes evening walks through her neighborhood, but now she always carries a phone with emergency contacts programmed in. And sometimes, on clear nights, she looks up at the sky and remembers the black helicopter that stopped her in her tracks and changed her life forever. The experience taught her that ordinary people can find themselves in extraordinary situations, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your instincts and ask for help when something doesn't feel right. David often jokes that their neighborhood is probably the safest in the city, given how much government attention it received that October evening. And Sarah has become something of a local legend among her nursing colleagues for the time she helped expose an international spy ring simply by doing her job with careful attention to detail. The notes she took that night were eventually declassified and are now used as a training example in intelligence courses about the importance of protecting civilian witnesses who accidentally become involved in classified operations. Sarah returned to her work as a head nurse, but with a new appreciation for the complexity of the world around her and the knowledge that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become the most extraordinary adventures.